afternoon. Welcome to this edition of Finweek Money Matters, the show that helps you manage your finances. I'm Samantha Loring and my co-host is Finweek's editor, Marc Ashton. Coming up on the show today, we take a look at the budding South African wine industry and how a local entrepreneur is making money exporting South African wines to Peru. Now, according to the 2013 Essential Facts about the computer and video game industry, the report showing that 45% of all game players and 46% of the most frequent purchasers of games in the United States are females. So we take a look at that in a South African context and take a look at the outlook for women in gaming. Plus, in our investment segment, have you practiced dying recently? And of course, we're certainly not advocating that, but what we are talking about is discussing the documents you need to prepare and other considerations in case of your demise. That's all coming up in the next hour. Please, if you have any comments for us or any feedback, send them through to moneymatters@abn360.com. Well, South African wines are much lauded all over the world, with wine exports steadily increasing, in fact, this year. In this edition of Finweek, Lisa Illingworth discovers how great wine and a good idea brought one of South Africa's favorite wines, Durbanville Hills, to the tables of Peru. Joining us in studio, Finweek journalist Lisa Illingworth, Ryan Sorway, the MD of salewine.co.za, and joining us on the line from Lima, Peru, Pamela Mudley, a managing agent at Mundo Exclusivo. So Pamela, before I get to you, we'll just have a quick word from Marc. Marc, this is a great case study in seeing a gap in the market, taking the opportunity, being an entrepreneur, and of course taking advantage of the great wines we have in South Africa.
For sure. I mean, I actually think it's genuinely a very cool story. I love the idea of South Africans being able to take a product, something that we're actually proud of, be able to export it into a market that doesn't know about us. And it was interesting because we were kind of talking about earlier in the week before the story actually got put together, the final version of it got put together, and we're actually talking about the impact of the 2010 World Cup. And we're saying, geez, are there any actual lasting results of it? And what turned out, what came out of this story was, it's one of those very subtle spin-offs that, our wines got exported, the awareness of them, and it just tied in perfectly with the story. And I just love the idea. And South Africans are crying out for stories about us taking our product into the international market. And for me, I just think it's just a really awesome story from that perspective. Yeah.
Let's go to Pamela, who is in fact joining us, as we were saying, from Peru. So Pamela, thanks for joining us today. What is great about this story is you certainly are putting South Africa on the map, because as the story points out, as many people didn't even know in Peru, that is, that South Africa existed, or they won't be able to point it out on the map if they were given it of Africa. So the point right now is that you've been able to get you've been able to start exporting South African wines into the local market. But take us through your story very quickly and how it all started.
Yes, thanks, Kirsty. Thank you for having me. Yes, this is indeed an extremely exciting adventure. Really, when we did start this out, I had absolutely no idea that it would turn out this way. And there were times when I personally wanted to give up. I must admit it's been extremely challenging. But, if you look at it now, I'm almost in shock that we've actually gotten to this stage. Like you said, many people in Peru, firstly, had not even known exactly where South Africa is located. They just know they see us as just one big country in Africa. So that's where the education comes in quite a bit. The World Cup helped hugely with this. And, I'm also part of the South African embassy here in Lima, Peru. I've accompanied my husband, that's the diplomat. And, that is part of our chores as well, to educate people about our country. And during the World Cup, there was a number of events that we had. And, Luxtruck and one of the events that we had hosted at the South African embassy residence, we had South African wine being served. Actually, it was one of the Middelburg cultivars that was served up. And, of course, many people in Peru totally stunned by the amazing taste and flavor that our wines offer. I was very lucky to meet with the current founder, the CEO of the ESK Group, Mr. Rohit Rao, very much an entrepreneur and really taking chances on opportunities that strike. The timing was perfect, and I was pretty bored being at home, and I decided I have no no previous experience in the wine industry. But I do come from a corporate environment. As I said, marketing is my strength.
Yeah.
And I decided to take on the project. And yes, so it started off like that. I have a bit, a fairly broad overview of the wine industry coming from Cape Town. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go directly for the Durbanville Hills brand because that has been, for many years, my favorite brand. I know the winelands very well because it's very close to my residence in Panorama. And yeah, so that's how the story started. I just got onto the website, sent a very brief idea on my proposal, and yeah, within a couple of days, this whole project kicked off. I was contacted by not only the winery itself, but the Latin American director for Distel, because Durbanville Hills, as you know, is part of the Distel stable. And again, a huge coincidence that the Latin American director was actually Peruvian, sitting in Sao Paulo, so it couldn't have been better. And we both had a passion to bring South African wine, and then the journey commenced. It's been a long journey, I must admit, a huge amount of obstacles and challenges when you're getting into a new market.
I mean,
and people don't understand.
Yeah, Pamela, so let's just get into some of those, and I suppose we can use that to look at, further examples just outside of Peru in terms of getting into new markets for South African wines. But one of the issues for you is the lack of a trade agreement between Peru and South Africa, which means that you've got import duties to consider, which means South African wines are a lot more expensive than those from Argentina and Chile. So how did you go through the process of marketing these premium brands essentially in the local market and convincing Peruvians that they would have to pay a lot more for South African wine?
No, absolutely. Firstly, when we had taken the South African wines into Peru, I was not going to compete on price because that was definitely, I was definitely not going to win on that strategy. So the idea was to create, to differentiate ourselves in our quality and our style, and I actually took advantage at that time of the stage that Peru has been in. In the last few years, Peru has been on an economic boom. More so also with Peru being part of the global scene right now in terms of tourism, in terms of gastronomy. So really, the timing couldn't have been perfect. The Peruvians were very open to other imports. It has been difficult because, firstly, as I said, they don't understand or they don't know, they're not aware of the South African category. South African wines did enter over a decade ago, but not too successful. So this time we had to do a whole new strategy. I spent a lot of my time really educating people about South Africa in general, let alone the wine. That has been amazing because to tell the South African story, automatically you get the buy-in, and then once people taste the most important thing is getting them to get the first taste. And once that happens, you sold. Because the South African wine, especially Durbanville Hills, together with the Peruvian cuisine, perfect match. So yes, it has been a bit daunting, but really rewarding once we started getting people to start trying out the wines. In fact, we've had a lot of success at one of the very prestigious wine exhibitions that is held annually. Yeah. And both last year and this year, our wines, people were really in awe about the quality and the style, and completely different from the wines of Chile and Argentina.
Pamela, thanks for joining us, and of course we appreciate your input into this conversation and setting the tone certainly for looking at the potential of South African wines offshore. That Pamela Madley joining us there from Peru. So Lisa, you wrote the story actually quite close to your story because you spent some time in Peru and you were there at the launch of Durbanville Hills. So what is the most kind of startling point when it comes to the success of their overall venture into the Peru market?
Yeah, I think the market is dominated by the Chilean and by the Argentinian wines, mostly on price because of that free trade agreement between the countries that they're able to bring it in. What was amazing was to see the response of the people as soon as they bring that glass to their mouth and they're able to taste it. They're able to link themselves with South Africa. Again, Pam said, that they sold the wine not just on the wine in itself, but on South Africa. Mm-hmm. And they sold South Africa as the concept, which is absolutely fantastic. And then the story of pinotage. The story of pinotage being one of specific to South Africa, grown here, we can get some more details on that just now, but the story of pinotage is being brought to South America, where there it's dominated by the Malbecs and the Shiraz, whereas the pinotage flavor is very distinct, it's very subtle, it's got beautiful highlights in it, and that reception by the Peruvian market was fantastic.
There's a question I want to throw to Ryan. I mean, Pam was talking about educating people about South Africa and about South African wines. I mean, you guys are obviously involved in matching up wine buyers and the wineries themselves. How much time do you actually have to spend educating people about what South African products are out there?
I think it is quite important. There's a knowledge of brands for the most part, but what the style is of an area or of a sub-area is very unknown. And certainly South African consumers are very nervous about trying things that are new. It's a bit like buying a car always. They want to kick the tyres first. They'd like to taste it and just understand a little more before they commit themselves to a 100 Rand price point in a restaurant on occasion. But it's not an unwelcomed education. There could be worse things in the world, and wine is a wonderful pastime, and people are engaged and they're willing to learn.
What about trends between developed versus, I mean, I find the story very interesting because obviously it's a developing market story. We know the big markets, Europe and the US, and they're probably quite familiar with a lot of South African products. What are the trends comparing developed versus developing markets in terms of South African product?
I think right now we're talking about South America for the most part, but the markets that are on our shore, the African markets, are very open to exploring South African wines, but they're being targeted by Chilean wine companies and French wine companies. West Africa is dominated almost entirely by French wine companies. So they already have a taste for the product, and the European wine styles are quite different. So what they're doing is educating the palate towards the European, and Chile is not that far away from that lighter style wine. And we're coming in last, and we're a little bit more of an uphill, but it's about government support again for those markets.
Exactly, but that's my question. Are we missing a trick then? Should we not be getting better at educating the market out there and actually saying this is something we can invest in?
I think that's the most important part of education, but where's the support going to come from?
What type of government support is needed then, if you're talking about government support?
It's about roadshows, I think. Those are the most effective ways, putting an agent in touch with the supplier, with the producer in the first place. And then it's about backup within that market. What sort of environment are we creating around South African products in general? I think if you went to Gabon or to Nigeria, you'd find quite easily that there's a dominance of Francophile entities which are pushing their culture along the way, and we're not really there. We're happy to sell things, but we're not happy to engage with them in a more tangible way.
Is this the responsibility of the DTI?
It is the responsibility of the DTI, and unfortunately within the wine industry, the DTI hasn't liked the wine industry that much. They've been very good promoting many other industries within South Africa, but the wine industry...
Why haven't they liked the wine industry?
It's a culture clash at the end of the day. There's a lot of Afrikaans people who own wine farms, and it's seen as a rich man's industry. And if you've got enough money to buy a wine farm, they kind of think you should be able enough to go and support yourself out there instead of them supporting you. They have changed their policy slightly on supporting of the Asian markets, China especially, and India. That is obviously BRICS relationships that are kicking in there. But compared to what we're doing versus what, again, I'm going to talk about Spain and France are doing within Asia, we're a drop in the ocean on our promotion work.
But is it improving? Because I mean, we were talking, we talked movies a couple of weeks back, and the DTI genuinely, and I've slated them on a lot of occasions, but the DTI has genuinely made some really good inroads in terms of supporting South African movies over the last couple of years. Can you see a change that's actually happening in the South African market?
There is a change. It is slightly skewed still towards the entries in the market, the lower entry new farms who they really would like to support, as opposed to being able to support the larger brands who already have capacity to sell product into these markets and have a bit of a brand recognition, albeit small. The support is not quite in line with that as yet.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the numbers, when you're looking at South Africa's harvest, firstly, South Africa had the largest harvest, in fact, on record from, I think, for 2013 so far. It was up 5.4%, 1.5 million tons. But the point is that the rand has also been helping South Africa. We saw volumes up, I think it was 35% or something between December and May. So South African exports are getting out there to a large degree, also supported by the rand. But which markets are they moving more aggressively into right now?
At the moment, the target is the Asian markets. It's going to be China, it's Hong Kong for a while. Hong Kong's a very easy entry point, very high profile wine market. America should be one of those markets that are slightly more targeted. There are a lot of sellers in there, but it's a very competitive market. But I think the low-hanging fruit might be in indications like Peru, like Chile, where there's a bit of a wine culture, but there's not much focus on imported brands. We look at in South Africa how the market has changed slightly, as we were very negative towards any imported wine, mainly because of price, and we had a particular style of wine which the South African palates were accustomed to. But we've seen a lot more wine coming into South Africa recently, from the likes of France, from the likes of Italy, Spain, Portugal, and that's kind of opened up the market quite nicely, and much could be said for other wine-producing countries. There should be more focus on Africa. We've got a lot of fruit trading going on there at the moment. We have a lot of mining houses which are bringing goods up through their channels into these African countries. And to piggyback on some of that, current momentum is a great plan.
I just want to check in something here. So I find this the e-commerce thing very interesting at the moment. Obviously, you guys are involved in e-commerce of wines. How important is it? And we don't seem to have an e-commerce culture in South Africa. Maybe it's starting to change a bit, but if we invested more in the infrastructure, allowing cleaner payments, being a high-speed internet, etc., would it change your business, and would that in turn have a knock-on impact to the local wine industry?
I think it would change it dramatically. What we're looking at is very slow internet speeds at the moment, and that being the business, we notice it quite a lot. The nature of the banking industry currently in support of safe payments, we're very safe. There's no issue about that. But we're becoming too safe. We're at the top end of the pyramid. The new institutions are verified by Visa and Safe with MasterCard are putting people off shopping online. And these were instituted recently for all online transactions without negotiation with the merchants. And the banks have said this is the way you will do business now. And we've had a lot of feedback from clients saying we're not happy with it, we don't want to do this, we find it cumbersome. So there could be a little more engagement between the banking industry if that's going to be the main source of where we put our money. It's got to be the transaction.
And handling of Forex then in amongst that payment, or is it really just a credit card type?
It is a credit card transaction. We do a lot of EFT payments as well. We just find people prefer it for the most part if they're not entirely comfortable with putting their credit card out there. But more and more, they're getting used to it. We're still at the early adopters phase, I think. We're not at any deep penetration, certainly from the wine industry. I've read recently that the likes of Want It All and the larger general retailers are growing substantially. A lot of them have not touched wine because it's a very specialized item and it's a heavy item for second transporting. But that would be the other component that we all need to work with from the banking, would be the couriers.
That would be my next question, yeah.
If we can get that right, the couriers are non-responsive at the moment. They don't see the value that online retail could add to their businesses. If we can speed up those delivery times and the safety of product in transit, it's the greatest joy to have a customer tell you, your wine has just been broken.
We've got to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But just very quickly, if you could, 30 seconds, if someone is now seeing Africa as the opportunity, what would be your advice to someone who wants to perhaps be an agent between the two? I know that's a place you're operating in, but what would be that advice?
I think it's find a local partner who understands the market, who's committed to, certainly from the wine side, to that kind of product in the industry, who's been there a while. Find a good source locally for great product, who's willing to back their brand, and the rest should be easy enough.
Thank you for joining us today. Joining us at the desk here, Finweek journalist Lisa Illingworth, Ryan Soray from salewine.co.za. It's time now for our Finweek Trade of the Week. This week's Trade of the Week is the Blackstar Group, and they of course are making investments in South Africa in the media space. They're listed on AIM in London. So tell us about why they've caught your eye.
Okay, so we talked about them a while back, but I think South African media and business media in particular is such a small industry at the moment. You're very aware of what's happening across the various media groups. We all share similar social circles, similar professional circles. And what's been very interesting to do has been to watch what we've all heard the Naspers story. The Naspers story has been phenomenal, and it's one that's caught imagination, but it's also got an international element to it. Blackstar owns a company called Times Media Group, which is 19% of TMG, which is the older Vusa company. And Andrew Bonamore has come in there as CEO of Blackstar and now CEO of TMG, and he is now cleaning up the group quite aggressively. Last week they announced that they were going to sell iNet Bridge, in fact, to Media24, of which we're a subsidiary. And what you can see is Andrew Bonnemore is changing the shape of the old Avusa group into what is now TMG, and I think it's a far more refined business. There are probably going to be good dividends that are going to start flowing back to Blackstar and subsequently to the shareholders. Blackstar sits on a net asset value of about 14 Rand a share at the moment. That's before all of this tidying up of the TMG assets. You can buy it at between 11 Rand, 11 Rand 50. So you've got quite a nice margin of safety between what you're paying and what you're buying. So I think in time you'll find that it's going to come through, and I think it'll be quite an attractive asset in time.
Without getting I suppose too subjective, and this is an issue that I suppose we're close to right now. But what is interesting about Blackstar is they're a company that is listed offshore. They're an investment company focused on Africa, and they see this as a key entry point into the African market. So media potential right now, I mean, you're obviously thinking a lot about that in the future of media. So how do you see the media space shaping up? And that, of course, is a long discussion, but very quickly on that.
Yeah, look, I think there's going to there's a breakup of assets. You can see Kagiso Media is doing some very interesting things, also a very interesting company. TMG is a far smaller, far more refined business. The media space is definitely opening up quite aggressively. You've seen Power FM coming on board, etc. I think what you're going to look at when you look at Blackstar, don't forget that they also have a whole lot of construction and steel assets that are sitting there, written down to effectively book value. You don't even take into consideration any growth or re-rating. There's a huge infrastructure story on which they will cash in ultimately. So you've got nice media assets, you've got nice construction and infrastructure assets. So I think it's one of those ones that plays itself out over time.
There we go. That, of course, Blackstar Group, the Finweek Trade of the Week this week. It's time for a short ad break. When we return, we're taking a look at South African women in the gaming industry. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. Recent statistics from market research company GfK highlighting that South Africa's gaming market is a 1.72 billion rand industry. In a recent edition of Finweek, reporter Christia van Heerden covered the spending potential of South African gamers. A few weeks later, the Finweek Money Matters discussion around the article sparked a heated debate about women in gaming in South Africa that taken to Twitter. So today we're taking a look at the South African women in gaming industry, and we're taking a look at the potential there and the spending potential. In studio with us, Jessica Hubbard, a journalist at Finweek, Pippa Shabalala, video game journalist, and Hanli Giza, the video game design lecturer at Wits University. Thank you for joining us. So Mark, you're outnumbered because it's Women's Month, but not just because of that, but because this is a growing market here in South Africa and worth some attention.
Sure. Okay, just up front, I'm just saying it. Jess said it, not me. No, I mean, I think one of the
What did Jess say? Let's just put that out there because everyone out there is clueless.
Cool. I think so. Basically, what we did, we looked at the gaming industry, and at the time, we actually had two gentlemen on the panel. And what we ultimately said, we may have promulgated some stereotypes out there about women in gaming. So what we did, we threw it out onto Twitter, and we started to get quite a heated debate going in terms of what is this, are we stereotyping women? What is their role within video gaming, digital animation? And we maybe take a few words back and say, hey, the industry is changing. This is a market we should be aware of. And, times are changing, and maybe we need to be aware of what's happening out there.
Yeah, okay. So let's take a look at the developments when it comes to how the industry is changing. I mean, we talk about, size of it in monetary terms, but how has the industry changed, say, in the last while that you've been covering it?
Look, I mean, I think, definitely there is a much more equal split between men and women, which is part of the reason that I was saying that, like, those statistics that you're putting out there are just simply not true. Well, I shouldn't say statistics, I should say, like, suppositions. That just simply aren't true. I mean, if you're looking at like the sort of the latest ESA stats, Electronic Software Association, granted that's a very American slant, and I'm aware of that, but that is an almost 50-50 split. I think it's something like 47% of gamers, particularly online gamers, are women, and which means that the spending potential in each household is again that much more. And you'll find that even if you don't have women playing the games, you've got a large amount of women spending money on games because they're buying for other members of their household.
Just to jump in with a question, do we know what type of games women are playing?
It is very much a cross-section. I mean, RPGs are very high on that list. And yes, I mean, you do find like social networking games.
RPGs being?
Role-playing games.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, there's more and more roles that are actually, in fact, women. Just doing some research, not being a video gamer myself, unfortunately, but more and more roles are being played by women, and more video games are being played with women at the kind of center of the video game.
Definitely. I mean, sort of looking at protagonists like Lara Croft, for example. And although there are some issues with that because she is sort of quite hyper masculinized, but it's the idea that as a strong female protagonist as opposed to the damsel in distress, which is very often.
How are you designing video games right now? Do you have male versus female target market in mind, or is that gender is not an issue in this world?
Gender is always an issue, but no, that is not how you determine your target demographic unless you're trying to achieve something very specific. In terms of design of video games in South Africa and production of video games in South Africa, I'm on the committee of Make Games SA, which is an NGO